criticized the BBC during Israel's ongoing genocidal campaign in Gaza all through the last 19 months, and rightly so. That's because the publicly funded British Broadcasting Corporation has disgraced journalism on countless occasions. However, the coverage on the BBC today has come as a breath of fresh air. Isn't it extraordinary that I am calling it a breath of fresh air when all the BBC did today was report news with utmost honesty, sensitivity, and objectivity, even though there was one individual, Lucy Williamson, who let down her organization with her questionable choice of word to describe the dual American Israeli IDF guy released from Hamas captivity. BBC's international editor, Jeremy Bowen, my former colleague at the corporation, and a man widely respected for his expertise on the region and years of objective reporting on the Gaza conflict, had interviewed the UNRWA chief, Filipe Lazzarini, on the catastrophic situation faced by 2.1 million people in Gaza, following Israel's policy to starve civilians to death. To be fair to the BBC, it picked up the interview from all its platforms. Radio 5 Live devoted its airtime to cover the interview.
Right, the time now, 8:41 here on 5 Live Breakfast. The head of the main UN agency for Palestinians has told the BBC that Israel's blockade of food deliveries to Palestinians in Gaza constitutes a war crime. Israel cut off aid to Gaza 10 weeks ago after the collapse of a 2-month ceasefire, saying it was putting pressure on Hamas to release its remaining hostages. Israel has banned the United Nations Relief Agency from involvement in aid deliveries after alleging that some of its staff were involved in Hamas's massacre of Israeli civilians on October the 7th. Our international editor Jeremy Bowen spoke to the man who heads up the agency, Philip Lazzarini, and put these allegations to him.
Well, first of all, we do not have any proof that staff of UNRWA has participated to the October 7th massacre. There have been an investigation for 19 staff, and the conclusion has been that for 9 of them, if the information can be authenticated and corroborated, there might be a crime behind it, and they should be held accountable. The agency decided, for the sake of the agency, to suspend the 19 staff, even for those for which there was absolutely no proof.
And the story dominated the coverage of the BBC News channel all through the day until Donald Trump landed in Saudi Arabia. It was refreshing to see the BBC presenters and Jeremy himself using the term war crime, genocide, and ethnic cleansing in relation to Israel without adding the caveat what Israel would say. Watch this fascinating interview of Jeremy by presenter Lucy Hawking. As you can see, no less a person than BBC's international editor is exposing war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu for carrying out the genocide in Gaza when he said there is a policy of destruction. He then went on to paint the horrifying and grim picture of an unfolding humanitarian disaster caused by Netanyahu by using the term catastrophe. He also exposed the Israeli claim by explicitly saying that there was no truth in Israeli claim that people of Gaza weren't facing food shortages.
Jeremy, we've been focusing very much today on the interview that you've done with the head of UNRWA, Philippe Lazzarini, talking about the hunger in Gaza at the moment, the blockade, 2 months now since they've had any aid into Gaza, and he describes that blockade as potentially being a war crime. We're not allowed into Gaza, but what are you hearing from inside Gaza? Because yesterday I spoke to the UN Agricultural Agency who said you can't grow anything in Gaza. Arable land has been destroyed, there's no water. How are people surviving?
Well, it's clear that there's been a campaign by the Israelis and by the Israeli army, and actually also using civilian contractors, because we've seen video of yellow painted, not military looking, destruction equipment pulling down ruins and destroying buildings and things like this. So first of all, it's clear that there is a policy of destruction. Gaza actually was, before this war, was a place where, while there were very densely populated areas like refugee camps, there were actually also open fields. People going to Gaza for the first time were sometimes rather surprised by the open fields, and that's because there were farmers there who grew quite a lot. The markets would be full of vegetables, grown in the area.
Livestock as well.
Yeah, I mean, there were... Gaza was, you know, for all its difficulties, was actually a pretty functioning place in that sense, despite many years of an Israeli blockade. In fact, going back to when Hamas took over, well, 18 or so years ago now. So it's what has become very clear from all of the reputable humanitarian agencies who work there, is that because Israel essentially locked and barred the gates of Gaza at the beginning of March, there was a little bit of a build-up in the warehouses up to then, because there'd been a 2-month ceasefire and they'd managed to get in a load of stuff. But that has now run out, and ran out some time ago. And the food that is there are apparently a few things in the markets, but they cost a packet, which most people are not able to afford. So there's this organisation known as the IPC, which is a sort of consortium of NGOs, the UN, some governments, and they, around the world, not just in Gaza, measure the figures that go into a food emergency. So they grind the numbers. And their latest update came out, in fact, yesterday.
Yes,
and
we covered it.
You've done it. Well, so you know then that, you know, it's all close to famine, and some people are in what they call phase 5, which is they call catastrophe. And that is a lot of people, actually, nearly 500,000. So there's a desperate situation there. I think there are voices in Israel who say it's a load of nonsense, but that is not true.
Jeremy then went on to expose Israeli plans to distribute food to people of Gaza with the help of a private agency manned by its own army of terrorists called the IDF. And pay attention to how he concludes.
I mean, the plan is, as far as one can make out, because I certainly have not seen a detailed printout, is that somewhere in the ruins of southern Gaza, and the town, it used to be, the main town in southern Gaza was Rafah. By all accounts, that's now rubble. And somewhere around there, maybe on the edge of the rubble, I don't know, there are going to be so-called secure areas where there will be checkpoints and people will go in, get checked, and then be given rations for their family. Now, the expectation would be then that some people might have to come from way up the top of Gaza, and moving through Gaza is really difficult, highly dangerous. So essentially what the UN is saying is they won't cooperate because this will only help some people, and actually they have a perfectly good system that works very well to get aid to people as long as the aid gets in. And there are thousands of tons of food and medical supplies stacked up, waiting just a mile or two away in Egypt.
Okay, Jeremy, the other thing he talked about today, and perhaps we'll get onto that later as well, is just saying he's looking for other people to take in, other countries to take in Gaza. So that
well, that's called, that will be called by Palestinians and by a lot of people around the world ethnic cleansing.
That will be called by Palestinians and by a lot of people around the world ethnic cleansing. Yes, Jeremy, that's the word, ethnic cleansing. And I'm glad this term and other terms are rightly being used on the BBC. And there is no presenter to push back saying that, you know, what Israel would say and Israel would deny nonsense. This is how one should report the Gaza conflict. It's absolutely shameful for anyone to argue that reporting the truth on the Israel's genocidal campaign is not objective journalism. Anyone who thinks this way is either compromised, lacks journalistic competence, or is bereft of humanity. Thank God we have journalists like Jeremy Bowen. The BBC then spoke to another former colleague of mine, Liz Doucet, in Saudi Arabia, and watched the bit when she quotes Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as saying that what is happening in Gaza is genocide. And again, there was no pushback from the BBC presenter when she used the term genocide.
It's the Saudi kingdom, the custodian of the two holiest shrines, which is the biggest prize of all. It was pursued as well during President Biden's team to try to sign some kind of normalization deal with Israel. That is just not on the agenda now. Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, has been absolutely blunt in public, one of the few leaders to come out and call what is happening in Gaza as genocide. And the Saudi leaders, including the foreign minister, Prince Prince Faisal have repeatedly made it clear no deal with Israel of any kind unless Israel accepts a clear pathway to a Palestinian state. And that is just not on the horizon under Prime Minister Netanyahu.
This is what happens when you have people with old BBC values and respect for its editorial guidelines reporting on Gaza conflict. But as I said, BBC representative Lucy Williamson, who is based in Jerusalem, reported this.
The last surviving Israeli-American hostage being held by Hamas in Gaza has been reunited with his family. Edan Alexander was captured during the October the 7th attacks while serving for the Israel Defense Forces. Lucy Williamson has more.
Kidnapped as a soldier, released as an American.
So while the presenter accurately used the term captured to describe the captivity of Edan Alexander, Lucy Williamson felt that Hamas had kidnapped a serving Israeli soldier. Wonder what it would take for people like her to bring her up to speed with the BBC guidelines and the knowledge of international conflicts involving an illegal occupier. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. Details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.